Hi everyone, I'm Airier, and today I'm going to be using Super Eyepatch Wolf as a distraction from the fact that I'm allergic to cats and one just used me as a tree, so everything about me itches because of the punctures from their nails. This is going to be Super Eyepatch Wolf, The Fall of the Simpsons. How did it happen? Now, I am aware that this is apparently a trilogy he has made over the course of 6 years. This one from 6 years ago, a previous one 4 years ago, and one that just came out 2 months ago. We're getting into something that's going to be a running series over more than half a decade. And I'm kind of curious to see how this has changed. Just because, one, half a decade is literally the equivalent of Simpsons saying just a small little fraction of the runtime, because I think they're over 30 years old at this point. Might be longer. I don't want to double check because I would feel very old, but also kind of young by comparison. And considering how many things lately have made me feel really old, I probably should look that up for my own benefit. More importantly, though, we're going to jump right in. You guys know the link. It's down below. Hit it up. If you haven't, why do that? You did? Good. Let's get started. Oh, wait, no, I have to do an audio test first. It's Super Eyepatch Wolf. He's sometimes very
expertly
quiet.
crafted narratives that the series' true strength becomes apparent. Even when the show ventured into its more surreal...
Okay, so apparently I didn't have to adjust the audio either. This is weird, but I'll roll with it. Okay. Starting up now.
There is a show that airs every night on the Fox network from around 6 to 8 p.m.
Oh, did they redo the intro? Oh, I don't think I've ever seen that one. I mean, it has been probably over a decade since I watched, so maybe that would do it.
And it's an animated series about a family of 5, Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. And it's not an exceptionally
That song he's playing in the background.
Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, and Maggie. And it's not...
I don't know why, but it reminds me just of like da, 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 the intro to The Simpsons, which is iconic at this point. But it feels like it gets a couple notes in and then it resets almost like a dance beat. I wonder if that's intentional to sound like this as kind of an homage, but slightly off-putting to make sure that everyone knows it's a Super Eyepatch Wolf video, so something's going to be wrong about it.
Not an exceptionally entertaining show.
It's
in fact,
passable.
It's downright mediocre. But what's so unusual about it is that the show goes by the name The Simpsons. And the reason this is so strange is that it bears a striking resemblance to another...
Thank you for 28 great years, Taylor Swift. What? One-armed man. Work was not stopped, one-armed man. Homework was not... What? Not stop one-armed... What? I don't...
Other animated TV series.
I just realized they put in a picture of Homer as an astronaut? What the hell is that? Things have changed.
From the early 90s, one also called The Simpsons.
Wait, what?
Which many people, myself included, consider the greatest piece of television of the 20th century.
I know The Simpsons was around back then. Is he talking about a different show? I know it's significantly different now, but was there actually a different TV show called The Simpsons? Or his joke is probably that, or I guess not even a joke at this point, his point, because it's a Super Eyepatch Wolf video, it's probably very depressing, is that how it happened is probably that it became horrible, not how did the show come to be. Ah, yeah, I see where this is going.
But make no mistake, no matter how similar these two appear, no matter what surface level resemblances exist,
they're playing on the phone and they're just playing on the... You know, I was going to say them being on the phone makes sense now, but also their sheets back here were blank. Huh. Why is this one? Oh, because it looks like a toy compared to something that looks like it's actually made of brass. That's why.
Are not the same show. And this, friends, is the story of how one became the other.
They reanimated the
one
intro.
One of the best and most influential TV shows of all time became just another sitcom. This
wasn't it just another
is the
sitcom
fall
initially?
Of The Simpsons.
Wait, this is the fall of The Simpsons? Simpsons is good again. The bizarre modern reality of The Simpsons. Okay, so we're getting an entire arc here, starting with it going bad. My initial assumption was, okay, this is how The Simpsons was created. This is where we're at. It's this. Followed by, oh shit, it's horrible. And the new one being, wait, it's good? Huh, no, apparently it's going to go with it's bad. Oh God, why is it so bad? Followed by, oh no, it's actually good. This is going to be a unique arc.
How it happened. So, to keep this outside the realms of my own subjective opinion, we're
Yeah.
going to chart the Simpsons' decline off the IMDb user review data.
On the one hand, 7.3 for The Town. The Town? 2017. Oh, 2017 is when he did this. Yeah, that would make sense. So it started at 8s and 9s, and then went down to 7s, and a little trend down on top of that. Admittedly, 7 doesn't seem very bad. Hell, I've seen some sitcoms that are... You know, I'm not going to drop this entire line of thought because it actually caused me physical pain.
Collected from nearly 300,000 individual episodes.
100,000!
Aggregated over the show's 28 seasons, which looks like this.
28 seasons. If they do a season a year, that's insane. And if there was ever a year that didn't have a season, I thought I was off by going 30 years. That's probably insane. Maybe closer to 40. But the fact that 30 is pretty accurate. That's actually kind of terrifying. That looks bad when you put it that way. I mean, this is a very misleading graph. It looks like it bottomed out to 0 on this, but it starts at 6 between 8.7 and 6.3. It's a decline, yeah, but it doesn't really seem like it's saying what he thinks it's saying, because the graph is cutting out a lot of it, showing that it's still not bad. Now, it is showing a very solid decline, but I don't think this is an interpretation of the graph because the graph itself is cutting out information. Statistics lie, and if you believe a graph the first time you see it, everything is probably wrong. That's just a normal fact, and this is a good example of why.
And so the conversation is, how did we get from the Simpsons mania of the 90s to present day, where the show is now widely referred to as Zombie Simpsons?
Seriously?
And to understand this, as well as the gravity of its decline, we need to first go back to the series' origins.
I've heard of Simpsons mania, if only because I've ran into a few people who are obsessive, and enough said, let's put it that way. Oh, Zombie Simpsons. I guess it's kind of treading water here, but yeah, the only really big decline is this one. I still don't see this as a bad period, though, at least based on these numbers alone. Overall quality of the show, and maybe it's diehards who just live Simpsons that might be holding it up, though. That might be actually the case then.
TV of the 80s was a very different place from what we have today. While the first half of the decade was dominated by soaps like Dallas and Dynasty, in its later half we would see the return and rise of the TV family sitcom, which showed...
I have never heard of Dallas or Dynasty. I thought... No, I'm thinking of something completely different. I think it's Yellowstone I'm thinking of. That's not Dallas. Just same kind of feel in the name.
It was like Different Strokes, Alf, and Family Ties dominating primetime TV slots. Each of these big shows centered around instilling the virtues of the American family unit, with smart aleck but well-meaning kids and wizened, loving parents. The families being shown on TV were safe and comfortable depictions of the staunchly middle-upper class.
Yeah. I hate these shows. Like, I legitimately look at this, it's like, wow, I'm bored. I hate this. I can see why Simpson Mania probably took off, because they were the idea of, we're edgy because we're going to acknowledge not being perfect, and the decline is everyone else copied them. So it became standard as opposed to the new kid on the block. It's kind of like if you have a really well-meaning family right now that doesn't have a dark secret, that becomes shocking, since most media goes for the easy shock value of, oh yeah, dad's a psychopath, mom's a killer, baby, you know what the baby did? They did some horrible shit. And I mean that in the literal sense. It was a war crime. Just poop everywhere, man. That's not really a joke. That's just a general toddler. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you've never had kids, or in my case, siblings, nieces, and nephews who decide now is the perfect time to prove that the conservation of matter doesn't exist by producing more than they ever took in. I really don't want to think about a specific memory right now, so we're going to move on before it becomes too real.
rich enough to be aspirational while not so wealthy that they become unrelatable, which
No. That was Full House. That one I know. That was a multi-story house by a bunch of people with random jobs and semi-employed status, Jesse. And they could afford a house in San Francisco. I mean, now that's just downright fantasy. Then it's just downright not likely.
which was fine as long as you were never in the mood for anything more than good, wholesome fun. But it was also TV at its softest and most docile. There's a sugary blandness to the television of this period, or as Matt Groening referred to it, the zombification of the American family. And it seemed like...
Also, was it really just at this time period? Because it kinda feels like the previous family-friendly stuff had that same effect. Leave It to Beaver, Bewitched. Like, sometimes they were a little more intense because, oh, wow, the kid talked back. I don't know if Leave It to Beaver ever did that. I don't even know if that was edgy for that or not. I just know the joke about June Carver because she was an airplane and the joke there was her speaking jive, which I learned about was a language and not a seasoning in Cajun cooking. And I'm still disappointed about that because, frankly, it was cooking related and then it wasn't. And that is always a downgrade because everything is better when it's related to cooking.
this was the way family sitcom was going to stay, right up until the last dying breath of the 80s, when on December 14th, 1989, 2 weeks before the closing of the decade, the Fox network aired the first episode of The Simpsons.
Wait, this was 89? So there's 28 seasons. That wasn't per year. This show is older than I am. Hey, I could feel young for once. Hey, this is a nice change of pace. It's becoming rarer. Ah, neat.
And in doing so, completely transformed television as we know it. It was dark, it was satirical, and it was hilarious. Rather than embrace the virtues of the American family like every other show of that time, The Simpsons seemed to be actively mocking them. It's a little hard to imagine given the modern media landscape, but back then The Simpsons were seen as an expression of blatant anti-authority, disruptive entertainment that challenged every convention of primetime.
Wait, The Simpsons were anti-authority? I thought it was just a challenge to what is accepted. But because there's always the general idea of anything that is different is a challenge to authority because authority is more comfortable with it. I think that has not really changed in some places, but it depends how they challenge authority. This, by not being wholesome, by not being, see how good American family is, I guess, kind of shocking. Although not criminal like it would have been to show certain parts about America in a negative light. That's not a joke. There were times during... I know it was in the 1900s, but I don't know when it stopped. I know it definitely happened during the 60s. I'm not sure about the 70s. Probably stopped in the 80s, and I'm not sure when. That if you portrayed certain parts of America badly, it was legitimately a crime. This probably would have been a literal illegal production at certain parts when that law was enforced. I guess that would carry over to now about... because it's so different, because it doesn't show certain things being perfect, like the idea of cops being incompetent, Wiggum, then it would do that.
TV that had built up over the 40 years of its existence.
Damn.
The Simpsons was counterculture, shining a spotlight and satirizing every ugly wart of American society that so many others willingly ignored. Bullying, depression, the struggle of the lower middle class. Nothing was off limits and everything was game, and The Simpsons took gleeful joy in exposing it all. Such disregard for what at the time were seen as modern American values quickly drew the ire of many parental and watchdog groups, decrying The Simpsons as a...
Oh, those assholes. Honestly, it's a continuation right here, but I just... For context, the watchdog groups are people like... Have you ever met someone who the term clutching the pearls jumps to mind before you even hear them speak? It's usually someone who is... so sure of themselves and how pure they are. And they most definitely have a literal child chained up in a closet, probably in the basement because they don't want to get into the normal basement, but the family's secondary basement where all the kinky shit happens. And they don't know who the kid is. They probably literally bought him at a wet market and he wasn't quite dead yet. It was probably the owner's son. It was like, you know what? I want the kid. You're going to give me the kid. They gave him the kid. And now they just have their kid chained up for their own sick amusement because that's the level of fuckery these people clutching their pearls about how horrible other people need to be, because if they acknowledge they aren't perfect, they might acknowledge, oh yeah, I'm also a literal monster. Am I projecting on that? No. Am I right? More often than I should be, because it's actually disturbing. You can look it up. It's not an easy read. Legitimately. If you find someone who says, I'm a good person, run. Is why I always say I'm an asshole. Because I am, and I'm proud of it.
Bashedly un-American, even drawing the disdain of former United States President George Bush Sr.
He watched TV.
American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
Who are the Waltons?
Of course, the disdain of such massive authority figures only fueled the flames of the Simpsons' countercultural blaze, and audiences across the world fell in love with the distinctly dysfunctional family. If you were born after 1990, you probably don't remember how big Simpsons mania actually was, but
I only saw it as a kid. I just know there were a few people who were absolutely obsessed. But I guess it felt more normal at that time.
for a time, The Simpsons was easily the biggest fictional property in all of media.
Seriously?
With even throwaway pieces of Simpsons merchandise turning into their own miniature cultural touchstones, like the Simpsons
Black
arcade
Simpsons?
game, a
Arcade
staple
game?
of 90s arcades across the world, or Bart Simpson's Guide to Life, which to this day is still one of my favorite books I've ever read.
That's a real book?
The Simpsons even had hit songs like the infamous Do the Bartman.
Do the Bart, you're bad like Michael Jackson.
What?
And so
That was an actual song. But it looks like a parody. It looks like a joke of Saturday Night Live if they ever got an animation budget. I fully expect Adam Driver to come out and say something about, we gotta love everybody's mothers. If you know the song I'm directly referencing, yeah, that's exactly how I thought that song sounded like. Okay.
Simpsons mania blazed on, but what truly made the show special was three core principles,
What?
each of which could be represented by one of the show's three creators.
Oh.
The first of which
I actually had no
was
idea what they
Matt
looked like.
Groening. Groening was the one who conceived the initial premise for The Simpsons. He first came to prominence with his uniquely warped
I'm actually impressed. Like, normally when I see artists, they have an entire process of, okay, here I'm going to do the sketch, then do another sketch, I reduce it to get the idea right, and I have it. And this guy's just like, okay, yeah, I got perfect shapes that look exactly like the character on a handful of sketches.
Conceived the initial premise for The Simpsons. He first came to prominence with his uniquely warped counterculture
That is
comic,
actually crazy.
Life in Hell. And if you go back and read this comic now, it's incredible how much of early Simpsons' rebellious spirit exists in it. And it's this disdain for authority and convention that gave classic Simpsons the edge it had. The second major creative force behind the show was Sam Simon. A veteran writer of TV sitcoms like Taxi and Cheers, Simon was the person who
Wait, the guy who wrote for Cheers was in The Simpsons. I was unaware of that. I only know Cheers because I have family that absolutely adored that show, to the point where when we went to Boston, where my family was from, they made a point to go to the kitschy Cheers-themed restaurant in the Boston itself. It wasn't shot there. It didn't look like it. But they had a sign out there and a door that looked similar, and people would go in there, and my family was one of them. And they were like, hey, we're at the Cheers bar. Yeah. Did not know that this was a creation of that same person. Damn. Or one of the people involved.
who took Groening's rebellious concept and gave it form, turning it into an actual TV show. He was the one who hired and led the original writing team,
Whoa.
and instilled the idea that the comedy of the show should always be grounded in its characters, and not just be a string of cartoonish gags, which gave the characters
Oh. And that's probably why we put Itchy and Scratchy in there, to show a cartoon that was just gag related. And then is the exact opposite of Family Guy, which is all gag related with occasional characters.
a real weight and honesty while also keeping the show consistently hilarious. The third and final major contributor
Oh,
to
yeah,
The
the old art.
Simpsons was a little more hands-off than Simon and Groening, but arguably just as important, and that was its producer, James L. Brooks,
Really?
who not only was the one pushing for the series to get made in the first place, but also largely credited as being the person to bring a heart to The Simpsons.
The producer,
While not
really?
on the actual writing staff, he'd often come to the yearly story retreats and was always keen to encourage ideas that were more emotionally resonant than they were satirical or comedic, often pushing episodes.
Huh. See, this is actually something that's kind of fascinating to me, because normally when you hear, and then there's the producer who pushed for an idea different than the show, It's followed by, and then it sucked. There are very few times in any recent project I can imagine or even think of or remember that didn't kind of screw people over because a producer got involved who was not part of the direct cast, crew, or associate. So all the episodes here that made it tear-jerking, that made it thought-provoking, that made you stop and think of like, oh shit. Because I know a few of those episodes. I think everyone has probably seen at least one at this point. They were all from the producer early on. Huh. I guess they really lucked out on a good one because so many times it's just an idea. The producer is there to screw you over. The upper, let's call them executives, have their idea of what they want and ignore what they're actually getting that from. A good example is actually a slapstick joke from Animaniacs where they brought into the Pinky and the Brain segment a third character because management within the show itself, in their own universe narrative, wanted a third person. So they brought in I think it was a dog or something of Pinky and the Brain. There was like a third one. It's like, hey, I'm here. And then the entire thing was just how that third character destroyed the flow because it was forced in there. And it was that type of internal production team showing that because of stupid requirements, it would destroy the actual product itself. That is what I'm used to seeing. This is actually fascinating because it's exactly the opposite. They really just did lucked out.
Those that featured Lisa or Marge as the protagonist, and is even credited at penning the beautifully bittersweet moment from the episode Lisa's Substitute, where Mr. Bergstrom hands Lisa a note that simply reads, "You are Lisa Simpson," before disappearing from her life forever. Rebellious satire, comedy grounded in character, and heart. These men and their ideals were at the core of The Simpsons, something that is plainly obvious by the fact that you can still see their names listed at the start of every episode.
And speaking of counterculture, having an emotionally charged episode focused on a female lead in a comedy usually doesn't go to heart. Is that Conan O'Brien? I think it is. Holy shit.
Of course, that's to say nothing of the actual writing staff who are also heavily involved in the development. John Swartzwell, John Vitti, Conan O'Brien, David M. Stern, these and many others were the exceptionally talented writers that made up the early staff of The Simpsons. And while Groening, Simon and Brooks oversaw the show's creation, these were the people that crafted each and every episode. One thing that becomes abundantly clear after going through enough old interviews with these guys is the incredible amount of work that went into each and every script.
The moment where you realize The Simpsons outlasted the career of Conan O'Brien, who has since, not in this episode, but more recently, retired from this. I mean, he's probably still doing something. I just don't know what it is. But The Simpsons have kept going on beyond the actual entire career of one of its creators. Honestly, they should just have a Guns N' Roses episode making fun of the fact that they've both outlived their initial members.
A team of roughly 12 writers would work multiple long 11-hour days on a single episode. And it's a little hard to imagine now given how seamlessly the comedy in classic Simpsons flows, but I think once you start to break down the way these jokes work, the effort behind them becomes abundantly clear. Let's take one of my favourite moments from one of my favourite episodes, Bart Sells His Soul, in which Bart sells his soul to Milhouse for $5. And after a run of bad luck and a rather horrifying existential nightmare, he realises what a mistake he's made and journeys out late into the night in order to find Milhouse and reclaim his lost soul. And then this happens.
Well, finally, a little luck.
It's a brilliant, darkly hilarious piece of comedy, timed, paced, and delivered to near perfection. But what's interesting is what happens when you break down the mechanics of how this joke works, mainly by recognizing that this is not one singular joke, but a combination of smaller ones. It starts...
Ooh, is he actually got... Sorry, this is something I absolutely enjoy in comedy. I know breaking it down destroys the humor of it, but a lot of the time, once you get the initial joke and it's funny, I really like seeing the breakdown of all the elements that make it funny, because it's not something you usually think about. It's just that thing you recognize and then move over because the humor stops being there. What we're looking at right now would be the initial joke that we assume is, oh no, he has bad luck. It's all right. And then it breaks. The second joke is that the guy's then making an antagonist of himself and getting immediate karma. That it would be 5 distinct jokes right there, or at least the lead-ins to them. This is a denial of expectation, a denial of a second expectation by going back to the initial expectation. So it's a resubversion, and then a subversion of this guy being the villain, and then immediately written off as a form of karmic humor. Huh.
Ones. It starts with Bart's bike being run over by the street sweeper. Second, it turns out all the street sweeper actually did was clean the bike. Third, no, it's actually been destroyed. Fourth, the reveal that this was actually an act of malice by some psychotic, nameless public servants. And finally, the street sweeper plunging down the stairwell. That's 5 jokes in 15 seconds. And I get that by breaking them down like this...
I mean, I get where he's coming on that one, but I still think it's more like 2 separate jokes. This is one consistent joke that just subverts itself, and this is a separate joke. They all tie in, but I personally, I would call it more 2 specific jokes. But I see how he's doing it. It's individual beats as opposed to beats within an overarching joke. Granted, by that same reasoning, it would be one continuous joke from beginning to end.
I'm robbing them of some of their magic, but
I
I
went
think
through
it's
the initial.
important to understand the underlying structure. And that is how each little piece of comedy builds on and expands on the one that came before it, crescendoing in the beautifully absurd and nearly surreal punchline. And it's a perfect example of the brilliant layered comedy of the jokes of classic Simpsons. These are jokes that, according to writers of The Simpsons from the time, would go through roughly 30 to 40 drafts of rewrites, which I think is genuinely evident from their makeup.
30 to 40. To give an idea, if you're going to speak for 5 minutes, that's a lot. That's maybe 50 pages. Depending on how much you speak, how fast you speak. If you want to do a minute, write 3 pages. 30 to 40 rewrites of a 20-minute show. That is a lot. A lot of it's dialogue heavy, sure, and they might not be adding scene elements, so it probably does shorten it down a bit. And that's probably just notes about here's what we want to happen during that time, during the actual rewrites. But that is probably multiple novels of individual drafts when compiled for every damn episode. God damn.
They're simply too layered and too intricate to be the product of one single writing pass. And this is also a style of comedy that was completely distinct to everything else at the time.
Really?
Sitcoms of the late 80s and early 90s were ruled by the laughter track, which had been a staple of American sitcoms since the 1950s, originally provided by a live studio audience, but now was just fake canned laughter.
I actually didn't realize they had initial live audiences. I thought that was just a joke they did, and then they had the canned laughter or the sign telling people to laugh. Didn't realize they actually had original humor. Huh. But it's animated, they couldn't do that, and they couldn't just drop in a laugh track because it would sound too obvious. Because of the effect... Okay. I should probably clarify. The reason canned laughter works is because human brains are weird. When you hear laughter, you initially think someone else is laughing. Maybe this is funny. Maybe I'm going to laugh. It's why if someone is laughing, you start to laugh easier. Now, you might not laugh, but if something then funny happens, it's going to be easier to laugh. It's why a lot of comedians, when they have an opening act, that opening act is warming them up. It's getting them in a mood where even if they're not funny, it's funny enough. So then when the headline comes out, it feels bigger, and it's great because the audience is primed. They're already there and feeling happy. They're feeling laughter. They're hearing laughter. So when you hear laughter and you see laughter and something actually funny happens, you're going to go crazy. But by the same note, when you feel like you've gone crazy and then something that's really not that funny, but it's slightly more than usual, like just slightly different, it just stands out just a little bit, your natural reaction is going to be immediately default to humor because that's the mood you've been in. And that's why laugh tracks work. And The Simpsons couldn't do that because they were animated. And they would have to literally write away the easiest cop-out way to get humor in a scene that might not actually be that funny.
Used as an artificial way to prop up lazy one-liners and unimaginative quips. The problem with using laughter tracks is that they only allow for jokes to be structured in a very particular way, with long lead-ins and big punchlines. But there is also a forced quality to it too, as it takes the onus away from the audience and tells us when to react. And if a joke is genuinely funny, then surely we don't need it to be pointed out to us.
Yeah, but a lot of these would be then done live. The problem with live is if you're still recording this and you have a live audience and they're laughing while you're talking, that gets picked up and it talks over the audience. So you need to write in an audience joke when they're going to laugh. So you need to script in the laughing. Wow, I can't speak today. That's more of a technical difficulty in doing a live audience. And an easy way around that would be not to have an audience, to not have the laugh track. But then you have complete silence. That is hard to work off of in person. Basically, the idea of reading the room is a huge help because everything I just mentioned about the audience, the same is also true for the performer. When you're up on stage, when you're reading something, when you're doing something, and you hear nothing, the first thought you're going to have is, oh, I fucked up. And that is so very stressful. When you hear canned laughter, it doesn't fit. But you can still get some idea of, okay, no, there's the humor. It's not as good, but it's there. Okay, we're good. It's hard to move from a vacuum. When you have an actual audience there, you can play off their energy. It's like, they like it. I can keep doing this. I can feel more relaxed. I can get into the flow. This is what they're here for. I'm doing it right. It's sudden confidence boosting. And if you then mix it with a canned laughter from a live audience at the same time, so they know when to laugh and you can script it out, and then the actors see that it's working and they are more relaxed and able to do their job, it does feed into each other. And again, that's something the actors within The Simpsons wouldn't be able to feed off of because they wouldn't have that feedback as well.
And if you want to see some proof of this, just check out what an existential nightmare The Big Bang Theory turns into.
I watched like the first 2 seasons. I don't know what happened after that. I heard it ended. I don't know. I never saw it.
When the laughter track is removed.
Sorry I'm late. What happened? Nothing. I just really didn't want to come.
I mean, gonna be completely honest here. It's such a stupid joke. I actually kind of prefer it this way. This is my kind of humor without the laughter track because it's blatantly, I just don't like you. But I also like that kind of shit. Yeah, I know. I'm actually enjoying this without the laughter track more than if it was there. I think that's more of a personal problem I should probably look into. Yeah.
Ugh. Not only is there not a laughter track in The Simpsons, there straight up could not be one. The pace, rhythm, and subtlety of the jokes didn't allow for it. Take our previous street sweeper gag. The way the joke is interconnected and paced means there's no space for canned laughter. The only place you could put it would be right at the end, and by doing so, you would ruin the darkly surreal atmosphere the joke establishes. And so, in disregarding the biggest crutch of TV sitcoms of that era, The Simpsons created a different style of comedy to anything else at the time. One that was consistently creative, surprising, and hilarious. And yet, despite how exceptionally the show delivered its comedy, it never did so at the expense of its characters. I think the key to what makes these characters...
Wait, never at the expense? I thought Homer was the butt of almost every joke. Usually, Homer's a bad dad, but he does care. He's just bad at it.
So distinct and memorable is that each one operates off a very specific set of conflicting beliefs and motivations. Take Homer, for example. He's an emotional man, equally prone to bouts of both intense joy and excitement, as well as fits of blinding rage. He's unintelligent and slow-witted, but not just that. He was also gluttonous and extremely lazy, and this aspect of his character would often prove more detrimental to him than his low intelligence. He was also an optimist, often choosing to ignore problems until they became unavoidable, but also just kind of wanted to be left alone, to go about his life his own way and enjoy the little pleasures of it on his own terms. And lastly,
I hate that I'm looking at that last image of like, yeah, he's a lazy glutton who wants to be left alone. And just the guy with all the snacks reaching in, zoning out on TV. I'm like, that looks nice. Yeah, I'm that idiot. Oh, God.
he really, really cares about his family. These
That's
are
the
the
redeeming
core
trait.
traits that define Homer Simpson. These are the motivations and beliefs that determine each action he takes. And in any given scene, you can see one or more of them pulling him in different directions. In other words, there was a consistent internal logic to Homer. No matter how outlandish the situation he was
the
in,
space
Homer
one, yeah.
could always be expected to act like Homer. And so when comedy did occur, you weren't just laughing because something goofy was happening, you were doing so because a character you were intimately familiar with had done something that made sense to them and only them. The comedy
If you want an example of a series where that doesn't make sense, look at any show where you're going like, why the fuck did they do that? I have learned my lesson. I am not going to say shit right now because if I do, I'll just make myself depressed because there's plenty of shows that I'm not going to think about. See? No thought at all. I'm very good at not thinking. That's fine. I'm thinking about them. No, don't say them out loud. It'll just make it worse.
comedy of Homer's character comes from his failings causing him to misinterpret the world around him and suffer because of it. This is the kind of character writing that was dense throughout every episode of The Simpsons, but it's only when this combined with the show's expertly crafted narratives that the series' true strength becomes apparent. Even when the show ventured into its more surreal territory, which it often did, there was always the feeling that each story had something to say, from accepting one's own mortality to corruption in politics, and even the nature of the human soul. And yet it did all this with a sincerity that never felt patronizing. And so The Simpsons delivered
That right there, you know what, I was going to not bring it up, but you know what, fuck it. The idea of, here's a sincerity about topics and morality without feeling patronizing, as opposed to look at any new media that touches on morality. It's always, hey, here's people who are wrong. And the easiest one, I haven't seen myself, thankfully, but a really good example, because my wife is very aware of it, and if I didn't bring it up right now, I would hear about it later, is Just Like That, or And So It Happened, or whatever it's called. The Sex and the City sequel that is very, I've heard described as incredibly safe. Like, we're going to talk about issues that never really matter, but we're going to talk about them as if they do. Or any pandering to an idea. It's not, here is an idea that we're going to look at and see how it can be good and bad and fucked up. It's, hey, you have problems. It sucks. I'm glad we talked about this. Stop being poor. And I'm very much thinking of Riverdale, the first season, for everything I just said, but that's just too on the nose at this point to point out.
classic episode after classic episode, like the touching, poignant Lisa on Ice, the genius season-spanning cliffhanger Who Shot Mr. Burns, and the irreverent, hilarious Last Exit to Springfield. These and so many others are some of the finest pieces of television ever crafted, and cemented The Simpsons not only as one of the greatest TV shows of all time, but as a bona fide worldwide cultural phenomenon. The Simpsons, it seemed, was unstoppable.
And then, who in the writing staff left?
And then, season 8 happened.
Eight
the
seasons?
8th season of The Simpsons is odd. It's still home to a lot of classic stories, in particular the episode Homer's Enemy, which is the all-time highest rated episode of the entire show. But
Really?
when you look at this,
That's actually a little surprising, because normally when Super Eyepatch Wolf talks about, and then shit happened, it's not subtle. It's usually really bad, but pointing out that the season where everything goes bad has the best rated episode. I wonder if it's the best rated because it also compares against everything else that didn't stand up to it. And it was a really good episode compared to mediocrity. Admittedly, they still went down to an admittedly still good watchable level. I put most sitcoms on a personal rating of 3 at best. Yeah.
This season closely, things were beginning to change in subtle but meaningful
Is this when they moved away from
ways.
Bart?
The rock-solid narrative commentaries of the earlier seasons were gradually giving way to stories that were growing increasingly more nonsensical. Homer became a heavyweight boxer, Bart started working at a burlesque club, Marge got involved with both the Italian mob and Japanese yakuza, and the family hired a...
Okay, I actually remember seeing The Nanny. That was weird. That's what this season was. It was literally putting in more gags as opposed to getting away with the normal stuff. Okay, that's why they're pushing the boundaries of, well, we're animated, we can do crazy shit that we couldn't get away with otherwise.
A magical British nanny. And I like all these episodes, but what they represent is the start of a pivot away from satire straight into the absurd. A pivot that's full significance would only truly come to light a season later with the infamous episode The Principal and the Pauper. It's an episode largely reviled by the hardcore Simpsons fanbase, and was originally written about
the death of Story? Jerk-ass Homer gets a job, destruction of Springfield, zombie Simpsons? Oh, that's what they've been calling it, yeah. Where it's literally not going to make sense. Yeah.
By Simpsons authority Charlie Sweatpants in one of his many fantastic blog posts about the show.
They actually did blog posts? How old was this? When did this come out anyways? There's no date down here. Unless season 9 is became broadcasting. Undead subpages. This is actually something kind of curious to me because it's the Dead Homer Society Manifesto. Oh my god. Referencing the Homer Society that was part of the show at one point. It was stupid. Wish I knew when this actually came
Charlie
out.
Sweatpants in one of his many fantastic blog posts about the show. Like a lot of seasons 8 to 10, the episode itself isn't particularly bad, and there's even some great jokes in there. But the problem comes from how it shatters the fictional integrity of one of the show's most beloved characters, Principal Seymour Skinner.
He was beloved?
Skinner, like so many other of the supporting cast of The Simpsons, is a geniusly written character. Designed as the direct antithesis to Bart, Skinner is a rigidly authoritarian abider of rules and a strict believer in hierarchy and order, used to hilarious effect in the episode The Boy Who Knew Too Much. But at the center of Skinner's character and what made him this way is his upbringing by his tyrannically oppressive, razor-tongued mother, Agnes. And the pair were a hilarious commentary on what overly authoritative parenting could do to a person.
I owe everything I have to my mother's watchful eye and swift hand. Oh, God. There's Mother now. Watching me. Well, I have a right to be here. It's school business. Mother, that sailor suit doesn't fit anymore.
I think we should go.
I'm hoping he's talking about him because it's creepier if it's her.
It's dark, comedic Simpsons brilliance, emblematic of how Simpsons of the 90s handled its characters. And in 22 short minutes, the Principal and the Pauper undoes all that. The entire episode is based...
Oh, so they basically changed their internal narrative to make it non-consistent, and it makes a plot hole, and you just have to accept it to move on. But it's still stupid. You know what? Now, in hindsight, this makes a lot more sense. And this is going to cause me pain on a literal writing basis. This is something I wish he would talk about right before this. What changed in the writing staff? Who moved on after 8 seasons? Did the producer move on? Did it go from different executive directors? I don't think the cast of The Voice has changed because they've been incredibly consistent for apparently decades. So it had to be someone else who moved on, because it does seem like such a big change to radically deviate from, here's the established characters, to, let's screw around with it because we can. Not even just the radical wackiness of it, which is what Family Guy intentionally was the entire time, but because it was always like that, if everyone's serious, it was just weird. This one always had that serious element of here's the heart of the characters, and then they just completely destroy that character because they want to change it?
During the premise that the upbringing that made Principal Skinner who he is and is so integral to his character never actually happened.
What?
Instead, the character we thought was Seymour Skinner is actually Armin Tanzarian, a street punk from Capital City who switched identities with his MIA officer after returning from the Vietnam War. It's not the first time The Simpsons delved into absurdist storytelling. Various episodes from even the earliest seasons would occasionally dabble in this kind of immersion-shattering narratives, but throughout them, we could always rely.
I mean, I'm going to be a little biased here. I like sometimes when you move into absurdist territory, but that's also because I like absurdism in general. As long as you don't think it's legitimate in its professions of what it says, it becomes a lot more interesting. It's like when you see a banana and then there's everyone going, this is an amazing piece of art. Don't ask, it actually happened one time. They put I think it was a piece of fruit, it might have been an apple, but I think it was a banana on a cardboard box in an art museum and people thought it was art. As an act of art itself, it's stupid. But as an absurdist piece, the idea of everyone's reaction to it is the art piece. It's not so much what you did, it's how it's interpreted. And just looking at it from an outside perspective and going, this is stupid. Do you see this is stupid? It's funny because it's stupid. That I enjoy because it does kind of shine a light on a situation that's fucked up, which is what satire does a lot, but just to an extremely crazy level that is often not interpreted well and done horribly. Which is also why there's very few times I actually enjoy absurdist art, because most of it is done horribly.
Rely on the characters to act like the characters. But now, this episode was telling us that a character who's been built up carefully for 8 years isn't real and never was. All for the sake of a cheap gag narrative that ultimately goes nowhere and says nothing. It felt wrong, a little perverse even. And if this perversion had remained just in this one episode, it wouldn't have been that big a deal. But unfortunately, this was just a prelude of what was to come. Slowly, as The Simpsons crept along, little pieces of it would start falling away and disappear. The narratives were becoming less poignant, the characters less consistent, and a lot of the jokes were starting to land with the laziness of the most average of sitcoms. Something was changing for the primetime series.
Who left? Someone had to leave.
Was corrupting The Simpsons. And
better question, who bought it? The production company or whoever the initial audience was. It was on Fox is what he's using right here. Did someone buy it out? Was there a merger? What changed in the background?
I think you can boil down this shift in direction to 2 primary factors.
Oh?
And to find the first, we need to look to what was happening the staff that made up The Simpsons in the late 90s. The 3 people credited as creating the show were long gone at this point.
Oh.
Matt Groening had moved on to other projects like Futurama, Sam Simon had left in 1993 over creative differences, and Brooks became less involved with the show from around 1995 after a public dispute with Groening over the episode A Star is Burns. There had also been some deaths on the cast.
Oh, so there was personal disagreements and people literally died, and depending on how close they were, that could have been bad. So it's not just that this went bad, it's that everything that could go bad had already gone bad, and this is still his first example. It was probably something on an upper level management side.
Most notably the tragic passing of Phil Hartman and Doris Graw, which unfortunately left some of the show's best characters without a...
Oh, he did the lawyer? I think I know this guy. He's like the helpful announcer guy. I didn't know he died.
Voice, and that's to say nothing of the actual writing staff itself. Here's a list of every major writer who was a lead on multiple episodes of The Simpsons during its most acclaimed period. In other words, the writers who shaped what the series was. And watch as we go forward through the years, more and more drop off, with a massive exodus right at the start of season 8.
So that is a lot of people who are no longer there. I'm sure they hired other staff, right? No, this is the 2000s. It wasn't quite to the bubble yet where it burst and everything was in bad shape financially. But this might have been near the writer's strike where they were probably in trouble. 2006, maybe? I wonder if that correlated with it because it would have forced more people to do less, or more people to do more with less. Nope, I'm still saying it wrong. It's less people to do less. I cannot speak today. Less people doing more with less time and less resources. So basically, you're 2/3 of the previous people here, do more. Yeah. Damn.
Which is when the ratings for the show would begin their slow decline, with only a tiny percentage of the original staff left by season 12.
There's only 3 people left by season 12. Tell me they hired people on. I mean, we've seen the overarching narrative where eventually in the 3rd video Super Eyepatch Wolf does, it gets good again. So eventually they brought in people who probably grew up on The Simpsons, who remembered the 1st season, who wanted to write like that. The show survived long enough for it to come back to its roots with passionate fans. That is what I'm hoping is happening. But we're not going to get there today. It's going to be all pain from here on out, huh?
I want to make it clear at this point that the purpose of this video is not to demonize any of the staff of The Simpsons from season 10 on, namely because I think that's a bit of a shitty thing to do, but also I think the problems are more complicated than that. But what I do want to do is explore how this change of staff affected the writing behind the series and how it changed its style of comedy. The best...
She goes to the same place as the dogs. Admittedly, that's actually not a bad idea. Dog groomers are expensive, but for a person, it's probably still cheaper because I've seen the cost of hairdressers, man. My wife told me what it cost for her to get just a couple things done before our wedding. And then she told me that those were just the nice basic level ones for the rehearsal dinner. And then she told me the actual amount for the wedding itself. And there are some things you should not find out, and that's one of them. That was a large number. That was more zeros than I was hoping for.
Best analysis I've seen of this is from a 2016 blog post written by Jonathan Jason, in which he breaks down a joke from a more recent season in the style of both modern Simpsons and classic Simpsons. The joke goes like this. Homer is sitting in an airport, and over a loudspeaker a voice announces, "Boarding has commenced for women, children, and fat men." To which Homer exclaims excitedly, "That's me!" And that's the joke. With all due respect to the person who penned this line, does this really feel like a joke that went through 30 or 40 drafts like Simpsons of old?
That's the entire joke. Seriously? I mean, maybe as a warm-up, but if that's not the beginning of the episode, if that's anywhere else, I'd only give it credit as a warm-up because it would just be that, a warm-up. Getting the audience in a mood where it's like stupid humor, a quick, easy laugh to prime them. Anything short of that, though.
It has no layers, no subtlety. It's just a self-referential throwaway piece of nothing. And ironically, the exact kind of joke a laughter track would fit over perfectly. Now watch what happens when Jason rewrites the same joke in the style of classic Simpsons. We have the same setup with the same announcement for women, children, and fat men, but this time Homer ignores the announcement and sits in blissful ignorance, before being approached by an airport staff member who taps him on the shoulder and says, sir, and points towards a queue of overweight men, before cutting back to
the comic book guy, Wiggum, and Barney. This actually would be dark because he would be viewing himself in a different light and being confronted by reality. I can see this as a much better joke. And yeah, this does function a lot better. You don't need to make it a warm-up. It is funny in its own right. And it wouldn't just be that, Homer fat. It's more, Homer's not comfortable with himself. He doesn't want to acknowledge reality because he is, and he hasn't taken actions to change it because his basic characterization is lazy. I have no way to empathize with that. There's no one off the screen saying anything right now. There's no one. I didn't edit any voices out at all.
To Homer, who had let out a disappointed doe. See how now, all at once, the joke is funny, tells us a little bit about Homer's character, about the airport and its staff, and is even a mild commentary on how society views obesity. Now it has layers.
And this is just going to be my take. I think this would also show more about the writing process itself. That initial 30 to 27 drafts is a lot. That previous one sounded like they had time to do one draft. It's the same people narrowed down, so they probably knew what they were doing. But if they're not given time to do it, I'm more or less assuming they probably had a very whittled down cast at this point. Now, I could be very wrong. And if I am, let me know, because I just like knowing that kind of stuff. But it does feel like a much more rushed process where you're taking the people who could get to humor, but they need to get to it and not letting them. At least that's my take, because the basic setup isn't bad, but just adding a few extra steps like done here really are funny and dark. But maybe they also had direction to not go dark anymore. I don't know. I don't remember anything about this entire time period.
Now it has a purpose. The article also reveals another problem that was creeping its way into The Simpsons, and that is the two characters present here are not actually the same person. One is the slow-witted, downtrodden everyman from the first 7 seasons, and the other, well, the other
What the hell is that?
jerk-ass Homer. Jerk-ass Homer is a term that's been coined to describe Homer of the modern era. While classic Homer is layered and nuanced, jerk-ass Homer is basically a wacky cartoon dad, an indestructible, supremely confident sociopath who's willing to leap headlong into any new venture for the most nonsensical of motives. There's little rhyme or reason.
Jerkass, I get where they're going for, but the actual best way to put this would be plot device. He doesn't exist as a character. He exists as a reason to do stupid shit because they can, which is exactly why they said he wasn't going to be written that way initially. He wasn't going to be just the gimmick, the random actions person. He was going to have a character, and all the jokes are based on that. But now it's the other way around. I wonder if it's just because they tried to go another way. Like, what were the directions behind the scene? Were there any novels written about this? Like actual tell-alls? Because this feels like the kind of thing that there would be an audience for. I wrote on The Simpsons, and this is how it fell apart. These are the people who destroyed it. The death of The Simpsons. Hell, I mean, we're watching something about that right now. It makes sense. There's probably someone who's done that.
To his actions, and the lens of satire was now being turned firmly inwards, with many of Homer's jokes being lame, self-referential one-liners of a far weaker show.
Fog machine? Even I think this is crazy.
Ugh. And this shift could be felt.
I'm sticking to my internal idea that laugh tracks make it worse. Again, the Big Bang joke, I liked it silent. I liked the inherent uncomfortableness about it. It made it feel more real. Like if someone made some kind of comment like that, I'd be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? And I like that because it does seem more realistic that way. Rather, it's not funny. It's like, this is kind of fucked up. What are we doing? I like that. I wonder if there's actually someone who has a very specific copy of Big Bang with the humor tracks removed, and it seems like a completely different show. I kind of want to find that now. I haven't wanted to, like, at all watch it anymore, but now I kind of do. Thank you, Super Eyepatch Wolf, for making me want to watch The Big Bang Theory. Oh, this feels weird because I wasn't making a joke there. Oh, that's just weird.
Felt not only in each member of the Simpsons family, but in every resident of Springfield, sometimes completely destroying characters in the process. Moe went from a violent, lowlife, vaguely criminal owner of a shady bar to a boring, lovelorn family friend who only occasionally said the wrong thing. Lisa went from a skeptical, isolated intellectual and voice of reason to someone who religiously follows popular trends. Or Barney, who goes from an alcoholic to a coffee drinker, turning him from a hilariously dark representation of a major societal woe into, well, someone who likes coffee.
They what? Okay, one, the Lisa thing is weird. She went all, admittedly, that's not a huge change for people who's like, I'm an outsider too. I want to be popular. That actually isn't a bad trend. They probably did it badly, but they could have done it well. Barney becoming sober and becoming caffeinated. Okay, one hits way too close to home there. Not just because I could probably cosplay as Barney with all the caffeine, both in general body type and having consumed that much caffeine in a few sittings before, so it's not entirely a joke. But just, wow. They made a lot of changes I was not aware of.
Every dark, satirical edge of Springfield was being smoothed out and sterilized. Its characters were slowly devolving into simple-minded cartoons of what they had once been. The exact kind of one-dimensional writing Sam Simon had worked so hard to avoid.
What the fuck?
The second major reason for the show's change is a little less tangible. The Simpsons was born out of a complete disdain for the status quo, a hatred for the neutered, zombified version of the American.
I know the joke they're making fun of here. One is the incredibly fake, disturbing smiles that stretch too far and are too flat. And honestly, for him, it actually doesn't look bad. For everyone else, it looks disturbing. But also because this is a painting. Oh, wow. Norman Rockwell. That is, actually, I remember his name. I forgot for a second. But yeah, Norman Rockwell. I cannot speak today. Wow. Word salad, man. Norman Rockwell did a bunch of Americana posters and paintings that were this style of just fun, cute, admittedly, really well done and just warm-hearted. And frankly, when they came out, it was celebration of America. For a long time, I think they were just kind of satirical because it felt wrong. And it's kind of reached the point now where you look back and it's like, it's kind of becoming popular again. That warm, open acceptance, just a happy memory. Not that it's current, not that it's real, but it's just like, this is nice. It's fantasy. And that's honestly how I look at it. But it was pleasant for that. This is that exact same picture done in the Simpsons style, highlighting how fucked up it is. It actually looks more disturbing.
Family that sitcoms of the late 80s depicted. And this anger gave The Simpsons its cynical edge it used to tear through pop culture of the time.
But
now,
The Simpsons became
10 years
mainstream.
later, The Simpsons was no longer a cruel and biting attack on popular media.
Because it was
the
popular media.
The pop culture landscape that the show had been created to lampoon had been utterly obliterated, and in doing so, The Simpsons lost its ability to truly be satire.
Because they were now the norm that everyone else compared to, and in some places Family Guy copied completely. By that reasoning, Family Guy would have had an easier time because what The Simpsons was devolving into, Family Guy started as, so they can only grow from that. Admittedly, I like Family Guy. Not all of the episodes. I will never go out of my way to watch them. But if it's on, it's like, okay, yeah, sure, it's a thing. It's never good, but you know what you get, and it always delivers exactly what you expect. Exactly what you expect.
Characters that had been conceived as a harsh critique of TV stereotypes of the time
don't
now
match the
lost
stereotypes
all
that exist
context. And The Simpsons itself was even being parodied by newer shows like Family Guy
Got
and
it.
South Park. The Simpsons as a show had aged out.
Wait. Did they actually... So they had the show, The Copying of Family Guy, with South Park making a parody of The Simpsons, talking about how they hate Family Guy for copying The Simpsons. Okay, this is actually a joke with layers, and I kind of love it.
Show had aged out, and as a result, it needed to transform and change its identity to stay relevant.
I wonder at what point the movie
and it
comes
did
back.
so in the most disappointing way possible.
Oh no.
And that was that rather than treating the idea of celebrity with the wry disdain it had in its earlier seasons, modern Simpsons revels in the celebration of the rich and famous. No longer were bespoke guest characters created for each new celebrity. The joke now was just let the Simpsons meet a celebrity and have that serve as the gag. And the result is some of the weakest, most insincere writing of the entire show.
Welcome to the United Kingdom.
Prime Minister Tony Blair?
Well, you can see the age that came from because they were actually happy to meet that guy. Ha ha ha, America making a joke about British politicians. I'm sure that will land somewhere. But also I'm American, so I really don't care.
182!
Who?
Thanks for the lift, Tony Hawk. I gotta go now, Tony Hawk.
Bart! You know Tony Hawk?
Is this really the same show that so thoroughly took apart celebrity-centric culture in episodes like Radioactive Man, Bart Gets Famous, and the B-Sharps? And the answer is no, it's not. This is no longer a show that satirizes pop culture. This is one that actively worships it. The only thing that The Simpsons was a parody of now
Oh, crazy dress as Lady Gaga. Okay, that makes more sense.
Was The Simpsons.
Kind of funny they're actively parodying
it would
themselves.
remain in for the next 2 decades, a soulless, shambling husk that only vaguely resembles what it had once been. And this is the period known as Zombie Simpsons.
Oh, they actually had the zombie
So
version.
with this in mind, let's return to our graph and put all this together. The Simpsons was born in the last breath of the 80s and quickly became the dominant force of early 90s television.
Oh, I just realized there's also a counterpoint that we're not bringing up here because it's within the same time period, but not the same franchise or medium. The 90s were very characterized in the same way the 80s were, in more of a comic style of becoming super dark, where the 80s were like super violent, super masculine. Yeah, whoo, ah. One, I was looking for an excuse to make those noises because I find them funny. I realize I probably just made a few people throw up on reflex. You're welcome. Not sure why, but the fact you thank me is kind of disturbing. But also because that led into the 90s of just being edgy and dark. And you basically think of The Matrix. The guys walking around in the trench coats with the glasses on, the hair slicked back. It's that level of edge. And while I actually did have a trench coat, it's because it was freaking warm and comfy, man. They're actually very nice. Like, unironically, joking aside with the stereotype and the assumptions, they are incredibly comfortable pieces of clothing. But that's just me being a pretentious asshole, as opposed to normal, where I'm just a regular asshole. So we have those counterpoints where it's probably close enough to animation that the people would filter into it at that time period to bring in a darker stereotype of this is what we're expecting into a medium that mostly has crossover between the comic side, the animated side, the cartoon side, into the sitcom side, which is all happy, fluffy. America is fine. Nothing bad is ever going to happen. Yeah. So I could see how that entire culture would come around and actually affect this interesting ways, because it would be a culture from one place transplanted into the other with people coming from a more humor standpoint that were aware of darker tones, but then writing for something that fits how they would write, but then in a sitcom that isn't darker tones. But then they went from that into people getting into 2000s where everything was so dark in reality, a lot of media started going darker, and then the counterculture of the darkness would have been softer, fantasy, happy, absurdist, because you don't really want to make a joke about something horrible happening when the stuff on TV is so much worse when it's just basic news. You basically could take anything in the last 20 years, and you more or less see my point there. I wonder if that was the reaction and why they went this way, because someone thought we were edgy because everyone else wasn't. Now everyone else is copying us and being edgy. What if we weren't? I personally think that's stupid, but I could see someone making that thought process happen. Granted, it could be done well, but I don't think this is the example of it.
With a ferociously satirical slant on not only entertainment, but also society itself, with masterfully written episodes and characters that drew in a global audience, thus creating Simpsons mania, right up until season 8, where major staff changes slowly began to eke away at the identity and craft that made the show great. Slowly, little pieces of The Simpsons began falling away, with characters that were beginning to only vaguely resemble who they had once been, reaching a critical limit in season 9 with the Principal and the Pauper. And thus, the show begins relying more and more on outlandish plots and absurd, self-referential writing. Until season 12, when now a decade away from the
Oh God, I remember this episode, Spring Break Forever. It was horrible. That was season 12? Yeah, never mind. I know exactly what I mean by zombie. This was just stupid. There wasn't humor in this.
Media landscape it had been created as a response to, the show ages out and, in an effort to stay relevant, transforms its relationship with pop culture, and in doing so snuffed out the final spark that made The Simpsons what it was. And so Zombie Simpsons is born, which would cause the legendary series to fall into a decline that is still happening today, bottoming out at its most recent season 28 with the lowest rate.
That was 28 seasons 6 years ago. Because we have this stuff 2 more and does get good again in the bizarre modern reality. Wait, if it's a bizarre modern reality and this is the so this is establishing how crazy and dedicated the fan base is, because the Mizarmon reality series that Super Eyepatch Wolf does is always focusing on the fans who become super fans, who become dedicated. And that's probably what happened when they get drawn back into the new episode. So as depressing as this is, it's the setup and the groundwork for the people who loved it at its worst and remembered when it was at its best, but then didn't leave. Huh.
Of the
At least that's my
entire
assumption.
history. Ultimately, it's hard not to feel sad about what's happened to The Simpsons, but even if the same staff had stayed on, even if everything had remained exactly the same for the show internally, I think Simpsons was too much of a time that it could never really have survived the turn of the millennium.
I would disagree, but I'm cheating because, again, I can see that it did. It probably did need new blood, but also just more awareness of the situation it's in, because they were doing something very, very established at that point.
So much of it was so rooted in the culture of the 90s and its media, and I think that's okay. I think entertainment isn't meant to last forever. Rather, it's an extension of the people and places that made it at a particular moment in time. And that's what The Simpsons is. One of the purest and most raw expressions of social and political unrest. Beautifully told and hilariously depicted. And despite what it's become and how it's all ended, I can't help be so glad that we got those early seasons. It was a show that shaped a generation and transformed entertainment as we know it, and I'm very, very glad it did. But regardless, this has been the story of how the greatest show on earth became just another sitcom. This was the fall of The Simpsons.
This would be a much more depressing video if I didn't know there was follow-ups to it. If this was all there was Super Eyepatch Wolf did about The Simpsons, I'd be sitting here going like, really? They just destroyed everything because writers moved out. They probably had bad deadlines. Just keep churning it out. And it became a 9 to 5 as opposed to a passion project, which the first season sounded like, because 27 to 30 drafts to get a joke in. That still sounds absurd.
How it happened.
I know I already said it, and I'm going to say it again. If this was all there was that Super Eyepatch Wolf did, this would be so much more depressing, because it would just show something really good with great people being stripped of everything that made it interesting. And while we're still at that point, the next part looks like it's going to be the fandom around it. The people who have draped themselves in The Simpsons, probably literally because it'll involve clothing. I'm just going to throw it out there, I assume at this point, because it seems to always happen. That's going to probably be the weird one out of all these. This is the depressing one. Next is the weird one. And finally, we're going to get the weird but optimistic one, where Super Eyepatch Wolf is most likely going to get a very weird sense of deja vu. It's like, did I do this? Did it all change? What the hell happened? How did it happen? And if that's what happens, great. And if it doesn't, I'm going to just remember right now where I'm hopeful, and I'm just going to die a little on the inside and then a lot more on the outside. Yeah. If I'm wrong, don't let me know. If I'm right, also don't let me know, because I don't want to be spoiled just yet. Otherwise, if you guys haven't already, there's a link below to the original video. Hit it up. And if someone can show me where I can find a maybe edited down version without the laugh track for Big Bang Theory, unironically, I kind of want that right now. And I'm a little disturbed, but not enough that I won't ask for it. If you can, thanks. If you can't, thanks anyways. Because friends don't let friends actually watch Big Bang. Unless you happen to know where I can do that. And if you know a guy who knows a guy who had a copy fall off the shelf, let me know. Otherwise, again, link below, hit it up. I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.